I used to believe big change came from big moments, huge, life-altering decisions, overnight transformations, the kind of stuff you see in movies where the main character wakes up one day completely different. But let's be real. That's not how life works. A few years ago, I came across a simple but powerful idea. If you get 1% better every day, just a tiny shift, over a year, that adds up to nearly 38 times better than when you started. That's not magic, that's math. And yet most of us ignore the small, consistent changes because they seem, well, too small to matter. But here's the hard truth. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our habits. Big transformations, they don't happen in a single leap. They happen in 1,000 small steps. So how do we actually do this? How do we improve just 1% every day? If success is only about massive change, we'll always feel like we're failing. But if success is showing up even just a little better than yesterday, we create momentum. And let's be honest, most of us have a pretty messed up relationship with success. We love the idea of transformation, the overnight success stories, the before and after moments, but what we don't see, the in-between. The boring, unglamorous, ordinary days where nothing huge happens except one small choice. And yet, that's where real change lives. I used to think if I wasn't making some dramatic leap forward, I was standing still. If I wasn't crushing a goal, I was failing. Sound familiar? Maybe you've told yourself, I'll start when I have more time. I'll go all in when I feel ready. But here's the thing. Waiting for the perfect moment to make a big change is just a sneaky way we avoid the discomfort of starting small. There's actually research on this. Psychologists call it the all or nothing mindset. It's that belief that if we're not doing something perfectly, if we're not seeing massive progress immediately, it's not worth doing at all. And wow, does that mindset wreck us? Because what happens? We either go all in, burn out, or we don't start at all. Either way, we stay stuck. But let's flip this for a second. Imagine you had to climb a huge staircase. One way is to try to jump 10 steps at a time. Sounds ambitious, right? But you're probably going to trip, get exhausted, maybe even give up. The other way, one step at a time. Steady, intentional, no leaps necessary. You still get to the top, but without the exhaustion and frustration. This is why we need to redefine success, not as the big leap, but as the next step. Because if we only celebrate the big stuff, we miss the progress that's actually happening. Let's talk about Olympic athletes for a second. When they're training, they're not making massive improvements every day. They're making microscopic gains. Fractions of a second faster, a slightly better angle, a tiny increase in strength. But over time, those small changes add up to gold medals. The difference between winning and losing in elite sports isn't about who made one big improvement. It's about who made 1,000 tiny ones. And it's the same in our lives. If you want to get stronger, you don't have to lift the heaviest weight on day one. You just have to show up. If you want to be a better writer, you don't need to write a novel in a weekend. You just need to write a little more than yesterday. Success isn't about perfection. It's about progress. I think about this every time I look at my own life. The moments I felt stuck weren't because I wasn't capable. It was because I was waiting for some big moment to prove to myself that I was changing. But change isn't loud. It's quiet. It happens in the moments where no one is watching, in the tiny decisions that don't seem like they matter until they do. So if you've been telling yourself that small steps aren't enough, I want you to challenge that, because the truth is, small steps aren't just enough, they're everything. Half the things we do daily are habits we don't even think about. What we eat, how we talk to ourselves, whether we hit snooze or get up. Change starts with noticing those automatic choices and shifting them, even slightly. Most of what we do isn't the result of conscious decision making. It's habit, it's routine, it's autopilot. And autopilot isn't necessarily a bad thing. Imagine if you had to actively decide how to brush your teeth every morning. You'd be exhausted before breakfast. But the problem is, not all autopilot settings work in our favor. Ever driven home from work, pulled into the driveway, and realized you don't even remember the drive? That's your brain running an efficient program. But the same thing happens with the small behaviors that shape our lives. The way we respond to stress, the way we show up in relationships, the way we handle failure. It's often less about what we choose in the moment and more about what we've been conditioned to do over time. The research backs this up. Studies show that nearly 40% of our daily actions aren't decisions, they're habits. And that means if we want to change, we don't just need willpower. We need to rewire the default settings. One of my favorite studies on this was done at Duke University. Researchers found that when people tried to rely on motivation alone, they struggled. But when they made small tweaks to their habits by changing their environment, adding small triggers, and making the right choices easier, they didn't just see temporary improvements, they made lasting changes. Think about something as simple as hydration. You don't need a grand strategy to drink more water. You just need to put a full bottle where you can see it. Want to spend less time on your phone? Move your charging station out of your bedroom. These aren't massive life changes, but they shift the autopilot setting. And let's talk about the way we talk to ourselves. Most of us have an inner voice that's been on repeat for years. And often, it's not very kind. If the first thing you tell yourself after making a mistake is, "I'm such an idiot," that's not a choice, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be rewired. One small tweak, catch yourself in the moment and reframe it, not with fake positivity, but with self-compassion. Instead of, "I'm terrible at this," try, "I'm still learning this." Instead of, "I'll never get better," try, "I'm making progress," even if it's slow. You don't have to silence the critical voice overnight, you just have to shift the pattern. This isn't about trying to force discipline or rely on motivation, because let's be real, motivation is flaky, it shows up when it wants to, but habits, they stick. So if you want to improve by 1% every day, start by noticing your autopilot settings. Because once you do, you can start rewriting the script. We're not superheroes, we're human. If you want to read more, put the book on your pillow. Want to eat healthier? Make the good choices easier to grab. Small adjustments to your environment make change feel natural instead of forced. Most of us have this idea that success is about willpower, that if we just try harder, if we just want it more, we'll finally stick to the habits we keep promising ourselves we'll build. But willpower is like your phone battery. It starts strong in the morning, but by the end of the day, it's drained. Relying on willpower alone is like expecting your phone to last forever on 1% without plugging it in. That's why the most consistent people, the ones who seem to effortlessly stick to good habits, aren't actually relying on motivation. They're setting up their environment in a way that makes success easier than failure. Researchers call this choice architecture. It's the idea that the way things are arranged in our environment influences the decisions we make. And it's not just a theory, it's science. Studies show that people are more likely to eat healthy when fruits and vegetables are at eye level in the fridge. They're more likely to exercise if their workout clothes are laid out the night before. They're more likely to remember a new habit if it's anchored to something they already do, like putting floss next to their toothbrush or writing a gratitude note while drinking their morning coffee. This isn't about discipline, it's about removing friction. Because the more friction there is between you and a habit, the less likely you are to do it. Want to stop scrolling on your phone late at night? Don't just promise yourself you'll have more self-control. Physically move your phone across the room before bed. Want to start journaling? Don't shove your notebook in a drawer. Leave it on your desk, open to a fresh page. These aren't big actions, but they make a big difference. One of my favorite studies on this comes from a group of researchers studying exercise habits. They found that the biggest predictor of whether someone actually went to the gym wasn't how much they wanted to, it was how easy it was to get there. People who lived closer to a gym went 5 times more often than those who lived farther away, not because they were more motivated, but because it was simply easier. And the same goes for the things we're trying to cut back on. If you're trying to reduce mindless snacking, don't keep a bag of chips within arm's reach on your desk. If you're trying to read more and watch less TV, don't just tell yourself you'll have more discipline. Put the remote in a drawer and leave a book on the couch instead. The goal isn't to make yourself work harder. It's to make the right choices feel like the default. Because when something is easy, we do it. When it's hard, we avoid it. And if you want to improve by 1% every day, the easiest way to do it is to stack the deck in your favor. The hardest part of growth is the messy middle, the part where you're still awkward, still fumbling. But if you can tolerate being not great at something for long enough, you'll eventually be good at it. The problem is, most of us don't like being bad at things. We avoid it at all costs. And I get it. There's nothing fun about struggling. It's uncomfortable, frustrating, and sometimes even embarrassing. But here's the truth. If you want to improve by 1% every day, you have to get comfortable with the discomfort of not being good yet. Psychologists call this the imposter curve. When we start something new, there's usually a burst of excitement. We're motivated, we're optimistic, we're picturing this future version of ourselves who is effortlessly skilled at this thing. And then reality hits. We stumble, we realize we're not naturally gifted, it feels hard, and this is where most people quit. Not because they're incapable, but because they mistake the struggle for a sign that they're not meant to do it. But struggling isn't a sign you're failing, it's a sign you're learning. Researchers have found that when people are slightly outside their comfort zone, they actually retain more information and build stronger skills than when things come easily. It's called the desirable difficulty effect, meaning the things that challenge us the most are also the things that shape us the most. In fact, studies show that people who struggle more in the learning phase actually perform better long-term than those who pick things up quickly. This is why kids learn so fast. They don't have the same shame around messing up that adults do. When a toddler is learning to walk, they fall constantly. They don't sit on the floor thinking, well, I guess walking just isn't for me. They get back up. They try again. And eventually they get it. But somewhere along the way, we lose that willingness to be bad at things. We become so uncomfortable with looking inexperienced that we avoid the struggle altogether. And that's a problem, because every skill, whether it's learning a language, building confidence, or getting better at your job, goes through the same cycle: awkward, frustrating, messy, then gradually smoother. There's a reason experts in any field will tell you that the best way to improve is to spend more time in the stretch zone, the place where things feel just a little beyond your current skill level. Not too easy, not impossibly hard, just challenging enough that you have to push through discomfort. And here's the kicker. If you allow yourself to be bad at something without letting it define you, you unlock the ability to improve at anything. Because the only difference between the people who get better and the people who don't isn't talent. It's the ability to tolerate the messy middle long enough to break through to the other side. We think motivation comes before action, but it's actually the other way around. Small wins create momentum. When we acknowledge progress, even tiny progress, we reinforce the habit loop. Most of us have this belief that motivation is something we have to feel before we act, that we need a spark of inspiration, some rush of energy to finally get started. But research tells a different story. Studies show that motivation doesn't just happen, it's generated. And the easiest way to generate it, celebrate small wins. Now, I know what you might be thinking, a small win, that doesn't count, that's nothing. But let me tell you, your brain loves small wins. It's wired to respond to them. Every time you complete a task, no matter how small, your brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation, learning, and habit formation. And that little dopamine hit, it makes you want to do the thing again. There's actually a study from Harvard Business School that looked at what makes people feel the most motivated at work. The answer wasn't money, promotions, or even recognition from leadership. It was something called the progress principle. The research found that the single biggest boost to motivation was simply seeing progress, no matter how small. Just the act of completing something, checking something off a list, making even a little bit of headway created momentum. And this isn't just about work, it applies to everything. Want to run a marathon? You don't need to feel like a runner from day one. You just need to celebrate running for 5 minutes. Want to build confidence? Acknowledge the moments where you speak up, even if your voice shakes. Those little acknowledgments tell your brain, hey, we're doing this. This is who we are now. The problem is we often dismiss small wins because they don't feel big enough. We tell ourselves, it's just one workout, it's just one chapter, it's just one good choice. But small wins compound. One workout becomes 2. One good choice becomes a habit. And before you know it, you've built something solid. There's a reason so many successful people talk about the importance of making their bed in the morning. It's not because a made bed changes your life. It's because it creates an early win. It starts the day with a sense of progress. And progress, no matter how tiny, is what keeps us going. If you want to improve by 1% every day, don't wait for motivation to strike. Create it. Celebrate ridiculously small wins. Acknowledge every bit of progress, even when it feels insignificant. Because motivation isn't something you find, it's something you build. The truth is, transformation isn't about some big dramatic breakthrough. It's about the tiny, almost invisible choices we make every single day, the ones that don't feel like they matter until they do. If you commit to just 1% improvement every day, you won't feel the shift overnight. But one day you'll look back and realize you're stronger, braver, and further along than you ever thought possible. The hardest part, trusting the process, showing up even when progress feels slow, choosing the next right step even when it's uncomfortable. But if you can do that, if you can lean into the power of small habits, tiny shifts, and celebrating every bit of growth, you'll create a kind of momentum that's impossible to stop. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to begin. Good luck and thank you.